My name is Joel Grimm. Until a week ago, I was a millionaire. Today, titles mean nothing. Money means nothing. The only thing that matters is survival. Day 1. The fortress. When the outbreak began, I retreated to my fortress in the Montana mountains with my wife and 8 security agents. I had built this place years ago, half as an eccentric project, half as an obsession. Now it stands as our only hope. The fortress is surrounded by 20-foot-high concrete walls reinforced with steel. The main gate is a slab of armored metal, remotely operated and secured with hydraulic locks. On the corners rise small towers where guards can keep watch day and night. Inside, the main house is powered by solar panels stretched across the roof, feeding a bank of batteries in the basement. For cloudy days or emergencies, I have gasoline generators. Silent ones, specially designed to dampen noise, because in this new world, sound means death. There is food, a pantry the size of an apartment, filled with shelves of canned goods, dried meats, pasta, rice, honey, and whiskey. In the back, a cold storage room keeps longer-lasting supplies fresh. Beyond the main structure lies the heart of the compound, the garden. Neatly organized rows of vegetables, tended by Elias, the caretaker, and his family. Potatoes, carrots, beans, tomatoes, all growing steadily. Beside them, a pen with a few cows, and a chicken coop that provides us with milk, eggs, and meat. At night, when the gates shut and the security system hums quietly, the fortress feels almost alive, breathing with us, protecting us. Still, I know the silence outside hides a truth. The dead are out there, wandering, listening, waiting. Day 2, counting the days of the second day, was dedicated to structure. Chaos outside the walls meant order had to rule inside. My security agents walked the perimeter with methodical precision, checking every inch of concrete, every bolt in the steel gates. The cameras were tested and recalibrated. Ammunition was counted, thousands of rounds stacked neatly in metal crates like pieces of currency in the new world. Elias tended to the animals. The cows moved lazily, unaware that the world had collapsed, their warm breath curling into the morning air. The chickens scratched at the ground, producing eggs that would become breakfast. These small rhythms of life felt like stolen fragments from a world that no longer existed. Inside the house, Amelia reorganized the pantry. Cans, jars, sacks of rice, bottles of oil. She handled them like relics. Each item was no longer just food. It was survival, measured in weeks and months. As night fell, a strange quiet spread over the compound. But beyond the walls, faint groans drifted through the mountains. They were out there, wandering, searching. The sound was distant but carried a promise. They would never stop. Day 3, the strangers, dawn broke with a pale, cold light. On the surveillance monitors, movement stirred at the edge of the forest. At first glance, it was the dead. The swaying gait, the staggering figures. But as the shapes grew clearer, hope and fear collided. They were living, a family, exhausted, starved, on the brink of collapse. 2 parents carrying 2 small children, their clothes torn, their faces pale, their eyes filled with a desperation I had never seen before. We opened the gates. Doctors, they said, a physician and a dentist. In the old world, introductions like that were casual, almost irrelevant. In this world, it meant salvation. With them came 2 children, weak but alive. Bringing them inside felt both like an act of mercy and a gamble. More mouths to feed, more lives to protect. But we all knew medicine would be worth more than gold. As night fell, I watched them sleep on clean blankets, their chests rising and falling slowly. Outside, the undead drifted through the valley. Inside, for a moment, the fortress felt like a sanctuary. Day 4. A fragile routine. By the 4th day, the rhythm of survival had settled in. The fortress became a machine, each of us a cog in its turning wheels. Guards patrolled in silence, boots crunching softly on gravel. The solar panels hummed under the sun, charging batteries that powered the cameras and lights. When the sun faded, the generators came to life, barely audible beneath their soundproof shells, humming like muted heartbeats. Elias worked the soil, pulling weeds, checking irrigation lines, guiding tender green shoots with hands that seemed older than time. His wife milked the cows, filling buckets with liquid white gold. The chickens offered eggs, small gifts of life. The doctors began their work. A spare room became a clinic. Samuel organized medicines into neat rows, while Claire sterilized instruments with the precision of habit. Their children, though tired, began to play in the courtyard with Elias's kids, their laughter rising like a ghost of the world before. Still, as night descended, the moans returned. Stronger, closer, carried by the wind, they seemed to echo off the mountains, pressing against the walls of the fortress like invisible hands. Day 5. The raid midnight shattered the illusion of safety. The alarms screamed, and the cameras lit up with movement, not the stumbling shapes of the dead. These were fast, purposeful humans. A dozen survivors, armed with crowbars, bats, and a few pistols. Their faces twisted by hunger, by desperation. They weren't here to plead. They were here to take. The compound erupted into violence. Muzzle flashes lit the walls. Gunfire tore through the night, echoing like thunder across the valley. Shouts, screams, then silence, broken only by the pounding of my heart. The attack ended quickly. The walls held. My men stood tall, but the price was hidden, not seen in bodies or blood. The sound, the noise we unleashed into the night. For in this world, sound is death. Day 6, the gathering. The morning brought mist and silence. At first, we believed the danger had passed, but by midday, the first shadows appeared at the tree line. Figures, slow, unsteady, swaying in the pale light, the dead. They did not attack at once. They lingered, watching, listening. One by one, more appeared. Dozens by the hour, drawn by the gunfire, by the screams, by the scent of life behind the walls. The compound grew tense. My men walked the walls with rifles clutched tight. The animals grew restless, cows shifting, chickens unsettled. Even the children fell silent, their games forgotten. The fortress, once a symbol of power and wealth, felt suddenly small. The world outside pressed against us, invisible but heavy. The silence of the dead was louder than gunfire. Day 7. The Horde. The 7th day dawned under a suffocating fog. The mountains vanished into white, and the world seemed to hold its breath. For a fleeting moment, I dared to believe the dead had wandered away. Then the sound began, low at first, a chorus of moans carried through the mist. Footsteps, dozens, then hundreds, dragging against the earth. And then they came. Out of the fog, shapes emerged. First a line, then a crowd, then a tide, the horde, hundreds of them, maybe more. Moving together, drawn by the noise of the raid, by the echoes that had carried through the valley. Slow, swaying, relentless. Not fast enough to outrun a bullet, but too many to stop. The fortress loomed strong with its walls, its steel, its silence. But as I stood on the ramparts and watched the wave approach, I felt the truth. This was not a fortress. It was a cage, and the dead were closing in. It's been a month since the world ended. My name is Joel Grimm, and I'm still alive, somehow. After surviving the first week of the zombie outbreak, our fortress in Montana became both our sanctuary and our prison. The walls held against the dead until they didn't. This is the story of the next month, of rebuilding, scavenging, and holding on to the last pieces of humanity. But survival always has a price. And sometimes the real danger isn't outside the walls. It's what seeps in when you think you're safe. Day 8, the breaking point. The 8th day began with gunfire and ended in smoke. When the horde reached the fortress, it wasn't a wave, it was a sea. Hundreds of them pressed against the concrete walls, moaning and clawing, layer upon layer of rot and hunger. The sound was deafening, a storm of despair pounding against our sanctuary. For hours, the walls held. The steel gate groaned but did not yield until it did. The hinges screamed. A section of the main gate bent inward, the steel buckling like paper. The dead poured through the opening. My men opened fire, disciplined, cold. We funneled them into the courtyard, a narrow passage between storage buildings, a bottleneck of death. For every one that fell, 2 more crawled over its body. The ground became a slick carpet of flesh and blood. When the last bullet echoed into silence, we were surrounded by stillness again and the stench of the dead. We survived. But we lost almost everything that made survival possible. Day 9, ashes and silence. Morning revealed the damage. The gate was ruined, twisted open like a mouth gasping for air. Beyond it lay the true cost, our garden, once green and full of life, now trampled into mud and gore. The rows of vegetables crushed, the irrigation lines ripped apart. Worse still, the animals were gone. The cows lay torn open, their bodies scattered near the fence. The chickens had been shredded, their feathers plastered to the ground. The sounds of life, the clucking, the mooing, were replaced by silence. Elias stood by what was left of the chicken coop, motionless. His hands trembled, not with fear but with grief. Those animals had been our lifeline. Now, they were gone. Inside, the survivors barely spoke. Even the children sat quietly, eyes wide, their innocence shrinking under the weight of reality. The fortress still stood, but it had lost its soul. Week 2, scavenging the ruins. Food became the new mission. With the garden destroyed and no livestock left, we had to scavenge. The nearby valley had several old farms. I'd seen them years ago when I bought this land. We prepared 2 trucks, loaded them with fuel and weapons, and set out down the cracked road. The world outside felt alien. No birds, no insects, just wind whispering through abandoned barns and rusted fences. The first few farms were empty. Corpses of livestock lay bloated in the fields. Houses had been ransacked, drawers open, furniture overturned, walls marked with desperate messages. But on the 4th farm, we struck something close to fortune. A few living cows still wandered the pastures, thin but alive. We also found crates of canned goods sealed in a root cellar. Nearby, an old tractor still had fuel, and beside it, 2 small trailers. We brought back what we could: food, fuel, tools, and 3 surviving animals. It wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. Week 3, the strangers at the farm. On the next run, we found something else: people. At a larger ranch, 20 miles south, we discovered a group of survivors, 6 of them, 3 adults, 3 children. They had barricaded themselves inside a farmhouse, surviving off rainwater and a single garden that was barely holding on. When we arrived, they were cautious, thin, tired, but not dangerous. Among them was a woman in her 40s, soft-spoken but calm. She introduced herself as a teacher. The others were farmers and their children, worn but capable. We questioned them carefully, searching for signs of sickness, instability, or violence. The apocalypse had stripped away politeness. Trust had to be earned. They passed every test. When we brought them back, the fortress felt a little more human again. The children's voices echoed in the courtyard. The teacher began organizing simple classes, math, reading, even stories. Anything to keep the kids from drowning in fear. For the first time in weeks, I saw laughter. Week 4, rebuilding the gate. Reconstruction began immediately. The steel gate was unsalvageable, twisted beyond repair. We needed new materials. That meant venturing to the lumber yard down in the valley, a place I once used for construction contracts. The journey there was long and tense. Abandoned cars lined the highway, their windows shattered, their interiors filled with dust and silence. In some, the silence was replaced by skeletons. The lumber yard was surprisingly intact. The main warehouse had been looted, but not destroyed. Forklifts stood still like rusted statues. We loaded planks of treated pine, heavy beams, nails, and rope. Then, in a corner of the yard, we found barrels of cement. Some were cracked, but a few were still sealed. It was a small miracle. Cement meant we could reinforce the new gate, give it strength. The return trip was slow. The trailers groaned under the weight. The trucks drank more fuel than planned, but we made it back. The following days were filled with labor. The men worked from dawn to dusk, cutting, lifting, shaping the new gate. When it was done, it wasn't steel, but it was massive, thick, and solid. A wall of timber anchored in cement. It wouldn't stop a horde forever, but it would hold. Week 5, the weight of routine. Time began to blur. Days lost their shape. The fortress, once a symbol of wealth, had become a village of survivors. Every corner of it breathed life again, though quieter than before. The children studied in the mornings. The adults worked, fixing, planting, patrolling. We began rebuilding the garden, small patches first, protected by wire and wood. The cows we'd rescued gave milk again, thin but enough to keep the children strong. The teacher's presence brought calm. Her voice carried a steadiness that reminded everyone there was more to life than fear. She taught not only the children, but us too. Patience, cooperation, humanity. Still, the dead were never far. We saw them at the edge of the woods some nights, silhouettes swaying in the moonlight. They didn't attack, but they were always there, watching. Week 6. Cracks in the foundation. Peace is fragile. It never lasts long. One morning, Elias reported something wrong with the water pressure. The pumps were weak, the filters clogged. We traced the problem to the old stone well near the edge of the courtyard, our main water source since the beginning. The air around it smelled foul. At first, we thought it was stagnant water. But as we lowered a flashlight, the truth revealed itself in the beam's reflection. Something moved down there. Something that wasn't supposed to. A body, pale, bloated, rotting. A zombie, one of the horde from weeks before, had fallen into the well. Maybe during the attack, maybe later. It had been there for days, contaminating the only clean water we had. We sealed the well immediately. Too late. Within hours, a few of the children began showing symptoms: fever, vomiting, weakness. Panic rippled through the camp. The doctors worked frantically, boiling water, mixing antibiotics, trying to contain what could become another disaster. That night, I stood by the new wooden gate and listened to the quiet hum of the generators. For the first time since this began, I felt the fortress trembling. Not from the undead, but from the fragility within. The walls could keep the monsters out. But how do you defend against what's already inside? When I built the fortress, I thought I was preparing for a war. I didn't know it would become the last version of a world that no longer existed. It's been more than 2 years since the first scream echoed through the empty streets of America. 1,000 days since the fall. And somehow, we're still here. The fortress doesn't look the same anymore. The walls once made for defense now carry marks of life. Vines creeping over concrete, wooden balconies, solar panels shining through the dust. Smoke curls from chimneys at dusk. Laughter sometimes cuts through the wind, thin but alive. What began as a refuge of fear has become a fragile settlement. We call it Haven Ridge now. Not a fortress, not a bunker, a home. The first summer after the winter of ash was harsh but kind compared to what followed. With the help of Meredith, the teacher, and the doctor couple, we turned what remained of the garden into farmland. The children became our workforce, their small hands planting, watering, hoping. We learned quickly that soil alone wouldn't feed us. The earth was sick, gray, cold, robbed of its strength by years of chemical rain. So we made compost from scraps, built greenhouses with plastic scavenged from ruined towns, and dug irrigation trenches that shimmered under the mountain sun. It took months, but the green came back. Tomatoes, corn, beans, small victories that felt divine. Amelia often worked beside me in silence. Her hands were rougher now, her face leaner, but there was light in her eyes again. Sometimes I'd catch her watching the kids play near the water barrels, and for a moment, I'd forget the world outside our walls. By the 5th season, the fuel began to run out. The generators, once the heartbeat of our nights, coughed and fell silent. At first, we rationed what was left. Only the freezer for medicine, only one light tower at night, only when necessary. But eventually, even that was gone. The silence that followed was both terrifying and sacred. Without the hum of machines, the nights were filled with whispers, the sound of wind through cracks, insects returning, the pulse of life reasserting itself. We learned to live by the sun again. Kurt and Ivy restored 3 of the old wind turbines. We found a rhythm, charge by day, survive by night. Mason said it felt like stepping back into history. Maybe it was progress, not backward, but inward. The community grew. Every few months, new survivors stumbled to our gates, gaunt, scared, carrying everything they had in their eyes. Some we turned away, others we welcomed. We created rules, not out of fear, but necessity. Every newcomer spent 3 weeks in quarantine near the outer field. We built small cabins there, isolation huts. They ate separately, spoke through wire, worked under watch. It wasn't cruelty, it was survival. One of them, a young woman named Tara, arrived with her brother and a story of a train that still ran between the plains. An automated supply line powered by solar grids, forgotten by the military. It sounded like madness. But madness was often where hope hid. By the 8th season, the fortress had become a village. Children were learning letters again. Meredith's school grew from a corner of the dining hall into its own wooden structure. The blackboard was a sheet of metal painted with charcoal. Their books were handwritten copies of old ones. At night, when the wind howled through the mountains, She'd tell them stories of the old world, about airplanes, oceans, and cities full of light. Some of the kids didn't believe her. To them, the apocalypse wasn't a fall. It was simply the world as it always had been. Amelia often said that was the saddest part, that the new generation wouldn't mourn what they never knew. The dead still wandered, though fewer now. They were slow, brittle shadows of what they once were. Some had been frozen through winter, only to thaw again in spring. We no longer feared a single one, but a herd, that was another story. In the second year, one came from the valley. Hundreds of them, drawn by smoke or sound. We saw them crest the ridge like a black wave. We rang the bell, a hollow metal drum that echoed through the hills. Everyone knew what it meant. We didn't hide, we prepared. Mason and Elias set fire to the trenches. The air filled with smoke and the scent of burning oil. The dead stumbled into the flames, shrieking soundlessly. Archers on the walls picked off the ones who made it through. When it was over, the field was a graveyard of ash and bone. We buried what we could. The rest the wind took. After that, we reinforced the gates again, this time with logs thick as telephone poles, bound with iron. No more steel, no more machines, just wood, rope, and will. Wood grows back, Samuel said. That's more than we can say for fuel. He was right. Our world was shrinking to what we could grow, repair, or make by hand. We began raising animals again, goats, chickens, even a few sheep. The sound of them brought strange peace. For a time, it felt like balance. But balance doesn't last. In the third year, the climate began to shift. The summers burned hotter. The rain came later. Crops withered faster. Rivers pulled back. We dug a new well, deeper this time, near the forest edge. For months, it gave clean water, until the taste changed. Metallic, bitter. Samuel tested it with what was left of our chemical kits. His face went pale. Contamination, he said. Something seeped into the ground. We sealed the well, but it meant rationing again. Baths became a luxury. The greenhouse misting stopped. And slowly, the earth began to dry around us. One night, Tara, the woman who spoke of the solar train, came running to me. I saw light, she whispered, on the northern ridge. Not fire. Light. Electric. We climbed the old watchtower before dawn. And there it was. Faint, flickering, artificial. For 2 years we'd believed we were alone in this corner of the world. That faint glow broke that illusion. Amelia looked through the scope, silent for a long time. If someone has power, she said, they'll have hunger too. Mason wanted to investigate. If they've rebuilt something, he argued, we could trade. Grow again. But I'd seen what power does to people when the world ends. It doesn't unite, it divides. Still, curiosity is a kind of disease. It eats at you slowly. By the 900th day, the children were taller. The older ones helped hunt. Some had never seen a city. They asked about cars, about music, about ice cream. Meredith answered gently, weaving truth and legend together. Sometimes at night, I'd hear them laughing by the fire. The sound felt like ghosts of a world that refused to die. Amelia and I had grown older, lines around her eyes, gray in my beard. But we were still moving, still breathing. That counted for something. Then, One cold morning, Kurt found something beyond the eastern woods. A drone, military grade, half buried in the dirt, its solar cells cracked but still blinking. The memory card inside held only one file, coordinates, hundreds of miles east, and an emblem burned into its casing. The same emblem that once marked the quarantine zones of the US Army. Under it, a single word: reclamation. The discussions lasted days. Was it a trap, a message, a warning? Tara swore it meant hope. If the military's rebuilding, they'll need people, she said. Doctors, engineers. We could help them. But Mason didn't believe it. Reclamation, he muttered, means control, not rescue. We argued under candlelight until our throats were dry. In the end, we did nothing. The coordinates stayed locked in the drone, sealed away like a secret we weren't ready to face. Still, sometimes at night, I catch Kurt staring at the horizon, the small radio clutched in his hands. Listening, hoping. On the 1000th day, we gathered in the courtyard. The children planted a small oak sapling, the first tree grown from seed since the fall. We called it the tree of the first dawn. The wind was warm that day, the sky clear. For a moment, it almost felt like the world was healing. Then the radio crackled. Not static, not whispers. A voice. This is Reclamation Zone 4. Transmission test. Survivors respond. Coordinates locked. Extraction begins at dawn. The courtyard froze. The children stopped playing. The adults looked at me. Kurt turned the knob, eyes wide. Joel, it's real. Amelia's hand gripped mine. Or it's the end. The voice repeated, clearer this time. Extraction begins at dawn. We stood there, surrounded by the fortress we had built, by the lives we had saved, and by the ghosts of all we had lost. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and something else. Smoke. I climbed the wall and looked east. The horizon glowed red, not sunrise, fire. And through the haze, a shape moved, long, metallic, gliding across the fields. A train, solar panels glittering on its roof, lights flickering in the mist. Tara gasped. It's them. But behind the train came movement. Dozens, then hundreds, shadows dragging through the smoke. Not survivors. The dead, drawn by the sound. The same mistake we had made once. Mason chambered his rifle. Well, he muttered, guess they found us after all. I looked at Amelia, at the children behind her, at the fortress, our fragile world of wood, hope, and memory. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel fear. Only clarity. Because survival was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning.